She fired the one man holding her company together. 45 seconds. That's all it took. The note was still on the console when the alarms went off. 3 words. Block print. Pressed down with a strip of Scotch tape so old it had started to curl at the edges. Nobody touched it. Nobody read it. Do not restart. Call me. It had been sitting there for 5 hours. 6:30 that morning, Isabella Langford walked into the Helix Dynamics Control Center for the very first time as CEO. 29 years old, red dress under a sharp blazer, heels clicking across the polished floor with the kind of rhythm that says, "I have already decided what this day is going to be." She had a plan, a speech about accountability, a cultural reset she intended to begin before most of the building had poured their first cup of coffee. She did not expect to find a janitor asleep at a desk. He was slumped in a swivel chair in the corner of the server room. Big man, tall, broad through the shoulders, but hollow-looking somehow, like something had been slowly pulled out of him over a very long time. Short hair, a few days of stubble, dark circles so deep they looked like bruises. His janitor uniform was wrinkled past any reasonable explanation. On the desk beside him, 3 empty vending machine coffee cups, a yellow legal pad covered edge to edge in handwritten code. And behind him, 24 monitors, every single one flashing red. She did not look at the monitors. "Security," her voice was even, certain. "Wake him up and escort him out. Pull his badge. He's terminated." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. The night shift employees nearby went very still, the way people go still when they're watching something happen that they know is wrong, but don't have the authority to stop. A custodian froze mid-push on his cart. 2 IT technicians exchanged a look, said nothing. Ryan Callahan jolted awake. He blinked once. His eyes went immediately to the monitors behind him, scanning the red warnings with the quiet speed of someone taking inventory of a situation only he fully understood. "Ma'am," his voice was hoarse, low. "You need to hear me about the system before anyone touches. I don't need excuses from a janitor." He looked at her for a long moment. No anger, no wounded pride, just patience, the kind that lives on the other side of exhaustion, when you're too tired to perform anything but the truth. He stood, straightened his uniform. The security officer unclipped his badge without ceremony. Ryan handed it over without a word. But before he turned to go, he pulled a note card from his shirt pocket, wrote 3 words in thick block letters, pressed it to the console, right in the center, where no one could miss it. "Do not restart. Call me." Then he walked out into the pale morning light. What nobody in that room knew, what Isabella certainly did not know, was that Ryan Callahan had not been sleeping on the job. Ryan Callahan had been awake for nearly an entire day and night. The previous evening, around 1 in the morning, he'd been mopping the hallway outside the server room when he caught it. Not a full alarm, nothing that clear-cut, just a rhythm in the network activity lights that landed wrong. A flicker, 3 beats too early, a small, almost imperceptible thing. Most people would have walked right past it. Ryan Callahan was not most people. He had spent 6 years as a military cybersecurity specialist before everything in his life changed, before cancer, before grief, before he traded a government clearance and a government salary for a mop and a night shift, for the simple, non-negotiable ability to be home when his daughter woke up. He sat down at the console. He got to work. No authorization. No backup. No one else in the room. Just him, the monitors, and a legal pad filling up with emergency patch code written from memory. 6 years of defending systems that could not afford to fail, now being applied to a building that had no idea he was saving it. By 6 that morning, he had built a set of emergency barriers around the most critical data in the company, the payroll of thousands of employees, and a $2 million charity fund earmarked for orphaned children, kids who had already lost more than enough. By 6:30, the barriers were holding. By 6:32, he was escorted out of the building. There is one more detail worth knowing, something that happened about an hour before any of this. Around 5 in the morning, a fellow janitor named Curtis had stopped by Ryan's station. His personal laptop, the one he used to send money home to his son every week, had been completely frozen for 2 days. Ryan looked at it for less than 10 minutes, found a driver conflict in the startup sequence, fixed it, handed it back without asking for anything. Curtis said thank you. Ryan said no problem and went back to holding the wall. Here's the thing about a wall. It holds as long as nobody knocks it over. And 5 hours later, someone was going to do exactly that, setting off the most expensive 47 seconds in Helix Dynamics history. The note was still on the console, waiting. A phone number written below those 3 words. Nobody had called it yet. If you've ever been judged in under a minute by someone who didn't know your story, drop a word below. Because where this goes next will completely change how you think about that morning. The note sat on the console for 5 hours. Nobody moved it. The morning IT team filed in at 8, logged their tickets, complained about the broken coffee machine on the 3rd floor, settled into their routines. The red warnings were still flashing on the monitors. But warnings flashed all the time at a company this size. You filtered them. You put them in a queue. The note card, someone quietly decided, was probably just the fired janitor's personal reminder. Ryan walked home through the early morning quiet, the kind of stillness that sits over a suburban street just before the school buses start running. Birds moving, sprinklers ticking, the whole neighborhood wrapped in that soft gray light that makes everything look like an old photograph. His apartment was on the 2nd floor of a beige building on Carver Street. Thin walls, a parking lot that flooded every April. He climbed the stairs slowly, one hand on the railing, and opened the door as carefully as he could. Ava was still asleep. He stood in her doorway for just a moment, long enough to see the rise and fall of her small shoulders under the quilt, long enough to see the stuffed bunny tucked under her arm. Mr. Buttons. She'd called him that since she was 3. Ryan had never once asked where the name came from. He'd learned early that some things in a 7-year-old's world simply are what they are. Asking for a reason only breaks the spell. He pulled her door closed softly, went to the kitchen, stood at the sink and ran cold water over his hands. Stared out the window at the parking lot for a long moment. Then he went to lie down on the couch with his jacket still on. He was asleep before the cushion finished settling. Back at Helix Dynamics, the system held until noon. It held because of Ryan's work. A layered set of emergency patches, coded and embedded through the architecture over the course of a long, sleepless night. Each one a quiet sandbag placed against a breach that had been widening for 3 weeks. Nobody in the building knew the patches were there. Nobody knew the system was being held up by something invisible. It just ran, smooth as anything, which was, in hindsight, the entire problem. Mark Delgado had been the IT supervisor on morning shift for 4 years. Competent, organized, confident in the particular way that comes from being the most experienced person in most of the rooms he walked into. He had never paid much attention to Ryan. The man showed up, did his route, left, quiet, kept to himself. There was that one time, about 2 weeks back, when Ryan had stopped by Mark's station after his shift and fixed a persistent error on Mark's personal work laptop. The one HR had told Mark 3 times to bring to IT took Ryan about 11 minutes. He hadn't made a thing of it, just said there was a driver conflict in your startup sequence and walked away. Mark had said thanks and thought about it for maybe 40 seconds. At 12:04, Mark decided the system was running sluggishly. Latency was up a fraction. The new CEO wanted performance numbers by end of week. A clean restart would almost certainly buy a 2% improvement. He initiated the sequence. He saw the note card first. He read it. He set it aside. Don't restart. Left by the janitor who'd been fired that morning for sleeping on the job. Right. He pressed confirm. What happened next took 47 seconds. The restart swept through Ryan's patches the way a hose clears chalk off a sidewalk. Completely. Instantly. Without knowing or caring what it had erased. The authentication back door cracked back open. Token synchronization failed across 3 servers at once. Dormant transaction triggers, embedded weeks earlier from somewhere outside the building, activated in precise sequence. $14 million began quietly rerouting itself toward overseas accounts. Mark stared at the numbers on his screen for 4 full seconds. His face went the color of old chalk. "Oh no," he said, very quietly. The way you say it when "oh no" is not remotely adequate, but is the only thing your brain can produce. The alarms started 2 seconds later. Isabella was in her first board briefing when her phone buzzed, then buzzed again, then rang outright. She stepped into the hallway. Mark's voice had lost all its usual steadiness. He spoke carefully, the way people speak when they are trying very hard not to communicate how frightened they are, and failing completely. "We have a critical system failure. Employee payroll at risk, roughly $8 million. The Orphan Charity Fund, $2 million. We have maybe 20 minutes before a transfer completes, and our team cannot stop it." A pause, then quieter. "Ma'am, I restarted the system. I saw his note and He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Isabella stood very still in the hallway. "I need his address," she said. "Whose?" "The janitor, Ryan Callahan. Pull his HR file, right now." She was already moving toward the stairwell. Her assistant appeared from around the corner. She held up one hand without slowing. "Not now," and kept walking. In the parking garage, she found her car, got in, sat for exactly 3 seconds with both hands on the wheel. Then, she dialed the number from the note card. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times, 4. "You've reached Ryan Callahan. Leave a message." She pressed end. Her hands were not quite steady. 18 minutes. $2 million earmarked for children who had no one left to fight for them. She started the car and pulled out of the garage. No driver, no plan, just the address on her phone screen, and the absolute certainty that if there was one person on earth who could still fix this, she had fired him at 6:30 that morning. She drove fast, the red dress, the blazer, the whole polished certainty of how this day was supposed to go. None of it felt like much right now, against the quiet fact of that phone going to voicemail. She had no idea who was going to open that door. Keep watching, because what she finds on the other side of that door is the moment this entire story turns, and nothing after it will be what you expected. The door opened on the second knock. Isabella had prepared herself. On the drive over, for anger, for a slammed door, for the cold courtesy of a man with every reason in the world to say, "Not my problem anymore," and mean it. She had not prepared herself for what she actually found. A small girl in pink socks, 7 years old, maybe, slight. The kind of slight that makes you think of sparrows, of things that hold themselves carefully in a world built a size too large for them. Her hair was in a ponytail that had mostly escaped its own elastic. She was holding a stuffed rabbit against her chest and looking up at Isabella with dark, patient eyes that were taking in considerably more than most adults would have expected. "Hi," said the girl. "Hi." Isabella was still holding her keys. "Is your dad home?" The girl studied her for a moment. "Are you from his work?" "Yes." Something shifted in the girl's expression. Not quite surprise, more like the quiet confirmation of something she had already suspected. "He said something was really wrong there," she said. Her voice was soft, unhurried. "He hasn't slept, not since yesterday morning." She looked down at the bunny in her arms, then back up. "He told me that when people need help, you help them, even when you're tired." That's what he was doing. Isabella's throat tightened, a slow pull, like something being drawn closed. "Can I come in?" she said. The apartment was small and cared for in the way that takes real effort. Not tidy. There were dishes in the drying rack and a pair of tiny sneakers beside the front door and a crayon drawing taped to the refrigerator that appeared to be either a horse or an extremely enthusiastic cloud. But it was tended. You could feel it in the room. The way you feel it in homes where someone is doing a hard thing with whatever they have and finding a way, most days, to make it feel like enough. On the counter, 3 takeout containers stacked neatly, an almost empty coffee can, a child's spelling homework, corrected in pencil, with a small, hand-drawn smiley face in the margin beside every right answer. Isabella stood in the middle of the living room and looked around. "His name is Ryan," the girl said, appearing at her elbow. "I'm Ava." "I know," Isabella said. "I'm Isabella." Ava considered this. "He's sleeping in his room. He looked really tired, so I didn't wake him up for lunch." She paused. "He dreams about my mom sometimes, but today I think he's just tired from working." "Your mom," Isabella said carefully. "She died when I was 4. Ava said it plainly. The way children say the most devastating things, not without feeling, but without armor, because they've had to learn to carry the weight of it rather than brace against it. Cancer. The words settled in the room like something that had always been there. "My dad took the night job so he could be home with me during the day," Ava continued, smoothing Mr. Buttons's ear with one thumb. "He said a little girl shouldn't have to grow up without somebody who's really there." She looked up at Isabella. "He's always there." Isabella's chest did something she didn't have a word for. Ryan was already awake. He'd heard the knock from the bedroom, registered it in that half-lit space between sleep and waking. Body alert before the mind catches up. He was sitting on the edge of the bed when Isabella appeared in the doorway, still in his uniform, the same clothes he'd worn for the past 30 hours. He looked terrible, hollowed out, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fully touch. He looked at Isabella, then past her, at Ava in the hallway, holding Mr. Buttons with both arms now, watching them. "Hey, Bug," he said quietly. "Hey, Daddy." Her voice was very small. He looked back at Isabella. "How bad is it?" "The charity fund has maybe 12 minutes, she said. "Possibly less. My team has been working on it for 40 minutes, and they've made it worse." He absorbed this, nodded once, slowly. "I'll come." Then, before she could respond, he added, "Not because you're apologizing, not because of the job." He reached for his jacket on the foot of the bed. "Because there are thousands of people who need that payroll. And because those kids," he stopped, shook his head slightly, "they've already lost enough." No anger in it, no performance of nobility, like a man reading from a decision he'd made about himself a long time ago, and never felt the need to revisit. He stood, put on the jacket, then he crossed to Ava, crouched down in front of her, took her face gently in both hands. She looked at him the way she always did, completely, without reservation. "I'll be home for dinner," he said. "I mean it this time." Ava reached up and pressed Mr. Buttons briefly against his chest. One firm, deliberate press. The way you hand someone something important. "I know," she said. Isabella watched from the doorway. She had arrived carrying the authority to rehire him, restore his access, offer an apology wrapped in a better title and a corrected personnel file. She understood, standing there, that she had not brought anything that mattered. What mattered was in that apartment. The cloud horse drawing on the refrigerator, the spelling homework with the smiley faces, a 7-year-old girl who understood her father's choices well enough to explain them to a stranger at the door. A man who had spent the night holding a wall up around other people's livelihoods and was now putting his jacket on to go hold it up again. She had fired him at 6:30 in the morning without asking a single question. The full weight of that landed now, in a way it had not fully landed before. Neither of them spoke on the drive back. Isabella focused on the road. Ryan sat in the passenger seat with the yellow legal pad open on his knee, reviewing his own notes from the night before, refreshing the architecture in his mind. His finger moved along the margin of the page, tracing something only he could read. Once, stopped at a red light. Isabella glanced over at him. He didn't look up. He was already working. 10 minutes later, Ryan Callahan walked back into the building he had been escorted out of that morning. The room went quiet. Not the polite kind of quiet. The other kind. "Stay with us." Because what Ryan finds waiting inside that system is something no one in that building expected. And it changes everything about what this day actually was. The control center went quiet the moment he walked in. Not the polite quiet of a meeting called to order, the involuntary kind. When a room full of people simultaneously understands that the situation has changed. Keyboards stopped. Conversations dropped mid-sentence. The custodian near the door. The billing analyst who'd come in early. The two IT technicians who'd been there at 6:30 that morning. All of them looked up. And none of them looked away. Ryan walked to the main console. Set his jacket over the back of the chair. Sat down. He pulled up 3 windows simultaneously. Closed one. Opened 2 more. His eyes moved across the screens with the calm, absorbing focus of a person reading a situation they know how to read. Not panicking. Not performing. Just working. Transfer log, he said quietly. Last 6 hours. Mark pulled it up immediately. Standing close, but not too close. The posture of a man who understands he has lost his authority in this room and is making his peace with it in real time. 8 minutes, maybe 7. Ryan's hands were already moving. He rebuilt the first containment barrier in under 2 minutes. Not precise. There wasn't time for precise. He isolated the charity fund behind a hard partition. Any transaction touching it would flag as unauthorized and loop back on itself indefinitely. Crude, but effective. He described it afterward to the IT team as taking the money out of the safe and putting it inside the wall. The transfer timer reached 0. The transaction failed to execute. $2 million held. Mark let out a breath that sounded like it had been compressed since noon. Then Ryan's screen chimed. Isabella had routed all incoming communications through his station. He'd asked for full system access. She'd approved it without hesitation. The first decision she'd made all day that felt completely, unambiguously right. He glanced at the notification, an email, flagged urgent, time-stamped 9 minutes ago. He read it once. His hands went still, just for a moment, half a breath, fingers flat on the keyboard. Isabella was reading over his shoulder. She read it too. A ransom demand. Clean, professional, no grammar errors. $10 million, 30 minutes, or every client file in the database gets released publicly. Sent from a rotating address that would be untraceable in under a minute. But Ryan wasn't looking at the address. He was looking at a string of characters at the very end of the message. The kind of thing that appears at the bottom of automated server communications. The sort of detail that looks like background noise, until you know what it means. He had seen that signature before, 6 years ago, a coordinated attack on a military logistics network. Patient, layered, deliberate in its targeting. His unit had traced it to a group that operated across rotating identities and always left that same string embedded in their communications, not by accident, like a name carved into a desk. This attack had not arrived at Helix Dynamics by coincidence. Someone had targeted this company specifically. Someone who knew the system, knew the building schedule, and, Ryan's jaw tightened slightly, had very possibly known that the one person likely to detect and counter the breach had just been walked out the front door at 6:30 in the morning. The ransom demand had been sent at 7:41, 1 hour and 9 minutes after he was fired. "I know this group," he said. The room was listening. "Then you know what they'll do if we don't pay," Isabella said quietly. "Yes." He was already typing. "Which is exactly why I'm not going to let them." What happened over the next 90 minutes? The IT team would spend weeks trying to fully reconstruct and document. Ryan worked the way a person moves through a familiar house in complete darkness. No hesitation. No wasted motion. The certainty of someone who has learned every corner by necessity, not by comfort. He built new firewall layers, collapsed access tunnels, rerouted the attack pathways back into themselves, creating loops that would keep the intrusion software occupied chasing its own traffic in circles. His fingers on the keyboard made a sound like steady rain on a porch roof. At one point, Mark leaned close to the junior analyst beside him and said, under his breath, "How does a janitor know how to do this?" And the analyst said, equally quietly, "He doesn't. Whatever he was before, that's what's doing this." And they stood there and watched and said nothing more. With 11 minutes left on the ransom clock, the breach collapsed completely. Every rerouted transaction reversed. Every access tunnel sealed. Every dormant trigger located, documented, disabled. $50 million in company assets fully secured. The ransom timer expired. The system held. Ryan leaned back in the chair and pressed the heels of both hands against his eyes for a moment. And in that moment, he looked exactly as exhausted as he was. A 34-year-old man who had not properly slept in 2 days, who had just, without fanfare, without announcement, saved a company that had escorted him off the premises that same morning. The emergency board meeting was called within the hour. Isabella had seen it coming. She'd had time. On the drive to Ryan's apartment and back, to think through what a meeting like this would look like. What she would say in it. She had prepared herself. What she had not prepared for was Ryan standing up first. He was still in his janitor uniform when he rose from his seat at the far end of the conference table. The 7 board members looked at him with the particular expression of people encountering something they do not yet have a proper category for. "I'd like to say something," he said, "before any votes are cast." Nobody told him to sit down. Nobody in that room, looking at him in that moment, had any interest in telling him to sit down. The chairman set his pen on the table. The room was very still. Whatever Ryan Callahan said next, everyone present understood it was going to matter. Don't go anywhere. Because what Ryan says to that board in the next 60 seconds is the most important moment in this entire story. And it is nothing like what anyone expected from a man in a janitor's uniform. 7 board members, 7 people in expensive chairs around a long table. With the practiced stillness of individuals who have spent decades making decisions that affect people they will never personally meet. They were not accustomed to being addressed by a man in a janitor's uniform. They were not accustomed to the particular silence that had settled over the room. The uncomfortable kind. The kind that grows when a situation has entirely outpaced the frame people built to understand it. Ryan stood at the far end of the table. No notes, no preamble. "She stepped into this role 3 weeks ago," he said. "She didn't know the system. She didn't know the history. She saw someone asleep at a desk and made a fast call. The same call most people in her position would have made." He paused. That's not one person's failure. That's what happens when a company has no system to protect the people quietly doing essential work. When no one knows their names. Gerald, the chairman, silver-haired, measured. Someone who had been with Helix Dynamics since the company occupied a single floor of a smaller building. Watched Ryan with the careful attention of a man encountering something he doesn't yet have a category for. "You're defending the person who fired you," Gerald said. "I'm describing what actually happened," Ryan said. "There's a difference." He let that sit for a moment. Accountability means giving people the chance to correct a mistake. If you remove her today, you're making the same error she made this morning, judging a situation before you understand it. He reached into his jacket pocket and set 4 handwritten pages on the table. The yellow legal pad. Different pages this time, not code, policy. 4 proposals. First, a direct escalation channel for any employee who identifies a critical system issue. So the next person who finds something doesn't have to fix it alone at 1 in the morning with no one to call. Second, protections for essential night shift staff, including rest provisions and workload monitoring. Third, genuine whistleblower protections, the kind that are enforced, not just printed in a handbook. Fourth, a required review period before any employee is terminated based on a single behavioral observation. He tapped the pages. These would have prevented everything that happened today. I'd asked the board to consider them seriously. He sat down. The room held its silence. Isabella stood. Her voice, when it came, was not the voice she'd walked into this building with that morning. That voice had been forward-moving, right-angled, entirely sure of itself. This one had something else in it. The particular quality of honesty that only sounds like honesty when it's costing something. "I terminated him because of what I saw on the surface," she said. "A man in a uniform, asleep at a desk. I made that decision in under a minute without asking one question." That choice very nearly destroyed this company, and it would have if he hadn't come back. She paused. "He came back," she said. "For the employees who would have lost their paychecks, for children in a charity fund who had nothing to do with any of this. He came back, and he defended me to this board. After I had him escorted out of the building." She looked around the table. "I don't know that I would have done the same." The chairman looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the 4 pages on the table. The vote took 6 minutes. All 4 policies, approved. Ryan's reinstatement, approved. Isabella's position, retained. With a formal review scheduled in 90 days. In the weeks that followed, things shifted at Helix Dynamics. Not loudly, not all at once, but in the steady accumulating way that real change moves when it's rooted in something genuine. People started holding doors a few seconds longer. Questions got asked before conclusions got drawn. The IT team launched a shared anomaly log that anyone on staff, from senior architects to the night custodial crew, could flag and have reviewed within 4 hours. Mark Delgado sent Ryan a message on a Thursday afternoon. Short, no subject line. "I should have listened this morning. I'm sorry. And thank you for what you did for my son." Ryan read it, typed back, "No worries," and returned to what he was doing. Isabella called Mark personally the following week to apologize for not listening, then said it again publicly at the company-wide all-hands meeting, where she formally recognized Ryan in front of the full staff. She stood at the front of the room in her red dress, said his full name, and read aloud, clearly and without rushing, what he had done for this company over the past 48 hours. When the applause came, Ryan sat in a chair in the back row, looked at his hands, and turned noticeably red, which was the most flustered he had appeared since any of this began. He accepted the promotion to Infrastructure Security Advisor with one condition. Stated simply, without negotiation, without apology. He was home by 5, every day, without exception. His daughter had homework. HR approved it before he finished the sentence. There is a kind of justice that doesn't arrive with ceremony. It arrives in a 6-minute vote, in a Thursday text message, in the moment a person stands up and says the true thing out loud, even when the true thing is expensive. It had arrived. And somewhere across town, in a second-floor apartment on Carver Street, a small girl was setting the table for dinner. 2 plates, same as always, and listening for footsteps on the stairs. Stay right here, because the final scene of this story involves a stuffed bunny, a school hallway, and something that no one in that building could have predicted on the morning all of this began. 3 weeks later, on a Friday afternoon that smelled like cut grass and someone's neighbor burning leaves 2 streets over, Isabella Langford parked in the visitor lot of Ava's elementary school and sat for a moment with her hands in her lap. The crossing guard in the orange vest was waving a second grader across the street with great ceremony. The kind of ceremony that says, this is the most important job in the world right now, and on a Friday afternoon in September. With the light coming through the maple trees that way, it honestly might have been. On Isabella's passenger seat, Mr. Buttons. The bunny had turned up in her work bag about 3 days after everything happened. Ava must have slipped him in during those few minutes in the apartment hallway, the way children give gifts. Without announcement, without explanation, trusting the gesture to carry its own meaning. Isabella had brought him to her office, set him on the corner of her desk, found herself, during long meetings and difficult calls, glancing at that worn flat left ear, and the calm, slightly lopsided expression that comes from being held with great dedication for 7 years. She had meant to return him right away. She kept finding reasons to wait one more day. She stopped examining those reasons too closely. Ryan was already at the school entrance when she walked up, standing just inside the glass doors, hands in his pockets, watching the hallway with that patient, unhurried attention he brought to everything. He was wearing regular clothes for the first time she'd seen, dark jeans, a gray sweater that had clearly been through a great many Saturdays. He looked rested. Not completely, maybe that took longer, but closer to it than before. The shadows under his eyes had faded from bruises to something quieter. He noticed her. Then the bunny. A small private warmth moved through his expression. "She's been looking everywhere for him," he said. "I know, I kept meaning to—" Isabella stopped and laughed at herself, softly. "I got used to having him around." Ryan looked at Mr. Buttons for a moment. He has a way of doing that. Ava came through the double doors the way she always did, fully committed. Sneakers squeaking on the tile, backpack swinging, ponytail almost entirely free of its elastic. She saw her father and her face opened up the way children's faces do, completely, without reserve, without any of the careful management adults spend years learning to undo. Then she saw Mr. Buttons. She stopped, looked at Isabella, then at the bunny, then at Isabella again. She walked forward, not running, walking, with a quiet purposefulness that was unmistakably her father's, and took the bunny from Isabella's hands and hugged him against her chest and pressed her face into his worn, soft ear and stayed there for a moment without speaking. When she looked up, her eyes were bright. "Thank you," she said simply. Then, after a beat, "I knew he'd find his way back." Ryan put his hand gently on top of her head. She leaned into it without looking up. The three of them stood in the hallway while Ava launched into a detailed and entirely serious explanation of the specific sleeping position responsible for Mr. Buttons's left ear being flatter than his right, a situation that had developed during a particular phase at age 5 and had never fully resolved. Ryan listened with the expression of a man who has heard the story more than once and finds it no less worth hearing. Eventually, when Ava had wandered a few steps down the hall to examine something on the bulletin board, Ryan said quietly, "In the Army, I learned that listening saves more lives than almost anything else. Not the kind of listening where you wait for your turn to talk, the real kind. 30 seconds of actual attention can change the whole outcome." Isabella was quiet for a moment. "I learned something too," she said. She glanced over at him. "That the person holding everything together is almost never the one with the title." He looked at her for 2 long seconds. No words, just the quiet, the comfortable kind, the kind that only exists between people who have been through something real together and come out the other side with their respect for each other fully intact. Ava reappeared at Ryan's elbow, Mr. Buttons under one arm, backpack bouncing. "Can we get pancakes?" "It's 4:30 in the afternoon," Ryan said. "That's a yes," Ava said, and started walking toward the parking lot with great confidence. Ryan shook his head, a small smile at the corner of his mouth. He looked at Isabella. "You want to?" "Yes," she said, before he finished the sentence. This story teaches us something that no boardroom policy can fully capture. The most costly mistake we ever make is the one we make in a hurry. Before we've asked a single question, Ryan left a note. 3 words. Anybody could have read it. Nobody did. Most of us have had a moment like that, not in a server room, but in a kitchen, or a hospital hallway, or at a holiday dinner table. A moment when someone we love left the equivalent of a note, a quiet word, a look that lasted half a second too long. A phone call that ended before it said what it needed to say, and we were moving too fast to catch it. Here is what this story asks of you, practically and specifically, this week. Think of one person in your life who shows up without being asked, the neighbor who shovels your walk before you wake up, the grandchild who calls on a Wednesday for no reason, the friend from church who drops a card in the mail when she knows your knee is bad. Not a text. Sit down tonight with the good stationery, the box in the hall closet, the one you save for important things, and write them 3 sentences. what they did, what it meant, what you want them to know. 3 sentences, a stamp, the good stationery. That is not a small thing. That is exactly the kind of thing that 30 years from now, someone will find tucked inside a book and hold against their chest and be so grateful existed. Read the note, write the note. That is the whole lesson. Has someone ever shown up for you, quietly, without being asked, when it mattered most? Or has there been a moment you wish you'd taken 30 more seconds before walking away? I read every comment. Tell me your story below. This story was written from a human heart with a little help from AI. Its only purpose is to whisper softly to you, hold on to kindness, believe in beautiful things. Because even on days that seem completely gray, life is quietly preparing little miracles just for those who refuse to give up.